All right, we're going to proceed here with our next presentation. So with us this afternoon, we have Mike Olson, who is our Senior Director of Administration and Workforce, and Kay Kenny, who is one of our lead volunteers. She was our Game Services Chair and responsible for overseeing all of our venues. So here's our next presentation.
Thank you, Scott, and welcome everyone to a great day, wrapping up games. And I found getting ready for this that I kind of lacked some of my games knowledge 6 months ago. So here we are with a great way to share a bit of information with you. We will start with some key learnings.
Sure. Hi everybody. We will get going here. Kay and I probably weren't nervous until Scott let us know that this is being recorded. So anyway, Kay, keep it clean, okay? This is how Christina got her, okay? So anyway, what it says on the first slide. Our key learning relative to planning integration, and really those are anyhow, is really to be deliberate about what you're doing from your integrated planning strategy. So when you look at planning with stakeholders, it's really about involvement and making sure that your stakeholders are involved and are part of the process. So unfortunately, we're not going to give you any magic formulas to achieve this. It's really about hard work and really being, as I say, deliberate about it and making sure that it happens. So, Kay and I talked about this, and really a stakeholder that's integrated in your process is one that's involved and one that's aligned with your plan. But that really comes from their motivations, and Leanne touched on that relative to our sponsorship strategy as well, that making sure it meets their needs so that they do feel a part of it. Once they're a part of it, then you have them, and then you're working together. So, So in terms of stakeholders, really the key there, and I'm going to say this 100 times, is deliberate. So our host ID stakeholders, here's some examples that we had. Really the key with us is that there are obviously both internal and external stakeholders. You really want to make sure that you spend the time naming them. Who are they? What are they about? Why should they be involved? Who are you working with, and what are their motivations as being a part of this? An example, we wanted to touch on the community, and that was key for us, is local sport organizations. They were some very key members in our community to make sure that we had involved, so that they could grow as organizations and getting exposure to this level of sport. But also to have that support as a host society with key members of our community that really have insight into who the volunteers are, and certainly with working with venues on an everyday basis as well. Then the next key when it comes to your stakeholders is really designing your plan with stakeholders in mind. How are you going to involve them? How are you going to make sure that they're a part of these processes? So pretty simple formula at the end of the day, and as I say, nothing magic that Kay and I could really think of on that.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the successes in terms of these particular areas. So staff and volunteers first, then volunteers and volunteers, board and community expectations, City of Red Deer, and Red Deer College. And we recognize that there's a lot more that we could talk about, but we're trying to keep this to a very high level. So in terms of staff and volunteers, we really want to echo what has been said already throughout the day. And that is that there were shared goals and values. From the bid committee, down through the host society, the board of governors, to the staff and the volunteers. And there was a very clear mission, that vision and values that were passed on down through all of the levels of and integrated into all of our plans. Another success was defined structure and role descriptions. It's always tough ahead of time to know what roles you're going to need. We were fortunate to have information that came from Canada Games Council on what had been done in the past, and it certainly helped us moving forward. But we needed to outline the plan for how both the staff and the volunteers would work together. so that they could collaborate and contribute to the success of the games seamlessly. Another success we felt was joint planning and implementation sessions. We had many informative planning and training sessions that were provided by the host society throughout the whole process of games development. They were staged at appropriate times to make sure there was learning and involvement of different sets of volunteers. And again, our goal was to bring together both staff and volunteers into a seamless group. Clear communication methods, we felt was fairly successful. We shared Google networks and documents, and that was key. I can't say that I'm good at it yet, but it certainly was something that allowed us to all be working on a similar or the same document at once, and to be able to share it throughout an incredibly large number of volunteers that were in our operation area. There were also newsletters that came out from the host society, emails, meetings, and we always did meeting notes so that those that weren't able to attend were able to go back and check to see what had been discussed. Flexibility and teamwork were valued and appreciated. And when you have an organization that has 4,600 volunteers, you have to be very cognizant of being flexible and giving consideration to others' needs, priorities, and challenges, whether it's with family, jobs that they were paid to do rather than their volunteer roles, and so on. And we tried to always focus on staff and volunteers working together to provide positive delivery methods, so that it wasn't always one particular way, but whatever worked for that individual, those individuals, as well as the situation. So volunteers and staff working together collaboratively as one integrated team was our goal. We also looked at volunteers, and I guess for me, being the volunteer chair of the Game Services Committee and the venue sites, this was critical. We had some incredibly skilled individuals come forward early in the process to say, I want to be involved, and most of them knew where they wanted to be involved. Rich Roberts, one example, he wanted to be the lead at the curling rink and nowhere else. I was very happy to have that. So individuals who stayed with us through 2 and more years, through the planning and the implementation. We had clearly defined operational needs and expectations. So there were volunteers who spent an awful lot of time, as well as did staff, but developing and sharing policies, procedures, and information. There was high quality training implemented through train the trainer method. So in other words, it was very effective having individuals who would lead by example and also reinforce the messages one with the other by sharing from one group of volunteers to another. We had strong team building through interdependent function meetings, both at a higher planning and on-site levels. And what we mean by this is that the higher level was the Game Services Committee, and the venues were the on-site areas. The functions have been mentioned today in various places in the presentations, but for us it meant responsibilities for venue, sport, medical, food, media, transportation protocol, all of the 18 different functional areas that needed to be integrated. The key component of each team coming together was relationship building, and you've already heard that today. How important that is, that they learn what and understand what each of their different roles were, how they would interact, who was responsible for what, and how we work together to resolve issues. And there are issues that have to be resolved. The way that we tackled that was through focused issue resolution training and practice. We had tabletop exercises that we did of what-if scenarios. They could be around weather, security, unexpected dignitaries, like an individual coming that you didn't expect, health issues, a bus breakdown, the list went on and on. We also had strong commitment by all of the leaders to the plan that we put together and to implement it at games time.
Just coming back to when Kay and I were talking about how we were working with our stakeholders and our strategies, I think Kay's a heck of an example of an internal stakeholder that we integrated pretty well. She started with one job, and then she was in, and we integrated her, and she was involved with the plan. So then all of a sudden now she's motivated, so then she got another job, and then another. And I think Kay was probably chairing 3 different committees for us that frankly were each roles on their own. Tons of volunteers and a lot of the super volunteers certainly in the room, but because Kay's working with me here today, I wanted to make sure I acknowledge you because you took on some pretty major stuff when we were in need, and it was never no, but I said you were a victim of good integration in our planning because now you're in, so you couldn't say no. So anyway, wanted to acknowledge Kay. She definitely was one of the beauties, so thank you very much. Another one of our successes around when we came to integrated planning was our board and community expectations. So really the key with this is fluid communication between board and operations. So you've heard policy, board governance, operations, and really the work of organizations to try to make that as fluid as possible. We were fortunate in that we were starting from ground zero. We could start to talk about these expectations as a group. Scotty, I don't know if you're talking about how the board and operations did that formally. I won't steal your thunder, but it was around what we called community impact presentation. So it was really about things that were coming from the community to operations and things operations were thinking about that might have a community impact. We had a process to deal with each of those to make sure that operations was on the right set of tracks and we were meeting those expectations. So from a planning point of view, this is really key to make sure that the community perspective and those expectations are integrated into your plans. Very easy for an operational team to just focus on their objectives and go, but the Canada Games are really about managing expectations, and I think that's key for any nonprofit or local community group trying to plan an event in your community. It's not just your own expectations, you're doing it for a bigger purpose. You need to make sure that you keep that in mind. Then the last key with that obviously is making sure that you resource it and that it's an operational standard that's set and you have resources pointed towards it. What gets measured gets done. So make sure that if those things exist that you are focusing on it, and I think we did it reasonably well, and I think Scotty will talk about how we did that with the board and the neighbors. So. Our friends at the City of Red Deer. So of all municipalities involved in the games in the last while, our city was probably the most involved and engaged that I think has been seen for quite a while. And that was a huge advantage to us as a community, but certainly as a host society as well. So that evolved certainly a bit. The city was heavily involved in that, certainly with our community leaders as well. But it went past that to transition. You've had other host municipalities in Canada Games where basically that's where they stop. They sign their joiner agreement and make sure that it gets done, and then it's the host society's job and let us know if you need anything. The city's with us all along the way, and the way we did that is we started with using a bit of a charter, really just defining how is our relationship going to look. What do you want out of these games? What do we need to do as a host society? What ties us together, right? And we really got deliberate about building that, making sure that that was something that influenced our plans moving forward. So I was certainly the steward of that from the host society side, and I would make sure that our staff and volunteer teams were aware that we were involved with the city. Here's how we're trying to work together, and here's what we're trying to get out of that. That evolved into ongoing operational planning, and that's probably where these relationships paid off the most, in that we could stay aligned with the city on what was happening with the games and what the needs were from the city, whether it be licensing or changes to roads or what have you. And there was a lot that was happening. So really, it's just kudos, I think, to the city as well, that they were definitely engaged in this, certainly for good reason, but it wasn't just another blip on their map. This was a huge opportunity for them, and we stayed together to make sure that that happens. So.
One other thing that I would like to add personally and thank the city for was that they allowed their key venue staff, so facility operations people, who were the owners' representatives out in their facilities, to also play a volunteer role as the venue team lead. And that was very invaluable. I learned that lesson myself in the 1995 Canada Winter Games, where I played a dual role as a manager of a large facility and the volunteer for the games. And it certainly paid off in spades for us at these games. Not always possible for those of you who are doing smaller events in the community, but it certainly was a huge benefit to us. Thank you.
So another key stakeholder, and just to talk about how we work with them, was Red Deer College. Certainly our most significantly involved venue. Our village was there. We had multiple sports hosted there, and they made a major change and basically a commitment at bid time to show their involvement in terms of changing their academic schedule, which is a pretty massive deal for them. Similar to the city, we talked with them at a greater level than just, okay, we're renting your facility, which dates and times do we need that to be? We talked about what does this mean to each other? How are we working together? This is a bit of a legacy from the bid committee to the host society on setting that up with the college before we got going. They were vested before we even started so that we knew why we were working together. Another way that we did this and trying to, again, engage and integrate the college more into our plans was to find greater purpose than just the core operational elements we had to execute on. So I worked with all of the academic schools in the college as well and presented with them and talked with them, and really we established a bit of a joint planning committee with their academic council on how do we involve the college beyond what is happening on those few weeks of the games. So that resulted in a number of things. We obviously had a number of practicum students come our way as the host society. They had a number of initiatives that they incorporated into their curriculum. And then we had a number of projects that we worked with the college on, including measuring our final impact of the games that I believe they're still working on today. So there were a lot of things that happened beyond just the games that made this bigger, and I think then created a greater connection with Red Deer College and increased their support for us as well. That evolved into operational planning. There was a lot of things we were doing at the college, and we had to make sure that we were aligned with them on that. And it was very different from how they operated. A host society and Canada Games likes to come in and just run a venue. Well, they still have to keep their college open, and it still has to exist for the students that are there. So those are a lot of things that we did have to work out. Another element, I mean, it just evolved that the college's staff were just that much more engaged in the Canada Games because they were a part of it. They were involved in what we were doing. I know Jan is back there. They were our representative at the college. Probably an element that we don't touch on is that you better make sure you have a lead and a steward as part of your organization on who you're working with. Without Jana, I'm not so sure how well it would have gone, so that was very good that you existed, and Jan was awesome because she knew everything about games anyhow. But anyway, I'm giving the college lots of kudos because I think our agreement and our bill is all done, so I'm allowed to thank you now, so it's all good. But yeah, the Red Deer College was certainly key in our success. What were our challenges?
And just before we leave that last item with Red Deer College, we were very fortunate that a number of their key facility staff just retired before the games started. So they came on board as volunteers to lead the different parts of the venue at the Red Deer College. So we were very fortunate, and you know, that's not going to always happen in the future, but it was good for us this time around. Challenges: gauging time and level of detail appropriate for all phases. This is a tough one. When do you involve volunteers in planning, and to what extent? Keeping in mind the time commitment they can make as volunteers. Managing the expectations of each stakeholder group, especially around communication. Some individuals want to be involved in every decision that's made and see every document. Others just want you to tell them how it's going to go, what's the bottom line, and let's get on with it. And so how do you meet both types of expectations somewhere in the middle and keep everybody happy. It needs a lot of thoughtfulness and strategy to pull off. Maintaining momentum. A lot of our team of people, especially volunteers, were working 2+ years doing the planning. Monthly meetings can seem never ending to them. They just get frustrated and they want to get on with the real job of hosting hosting athletes. So changing things up with your sessions, having some different things, speakers brought in, that kind of thing is really critical. And in my case, I'm not sure I succeeded there, but I certainly tried. Managing turnover with planning phases. So you are going to lose some key staff, maybe even the person that you're reporting to as a volunteer, which happened to us. Some key leaders in your volunteer structure, as well as stakeholder liaisons. So all of the individuals at Riverbend, our venue there, turned over as staff as well. So you need a plan for how to recruit new ones and get them up to speed effectively.
Another one of our challenge, this is certainly maybe specific to the Canada Games, but is creation of master plan that's executed locally. So really we have our high level plans that existed as an organization. And then we had to bring on our venue teams that Kay has referenced, and really it's their job to deliver on the games. Really as an individual involved in planning from the beginning, your goal is really to become irrelevant. But that's a challenge, and it was a challenge for us, and we knew it would be. It probably went as well as it could, certainly a lot of things it could have done differently. But really the key, when it comes down to it, and the thing that we experienced that was challenging, is just around decision making and the communication of that. What latitude does a venue have? What responsibility does a venue have? And really from a planning perspective, it's thinking about that, thinking about it from a head point of view and saying, well, what is that going to look like come time when we're actually going live? So, certainly a key consideration. Another one, planning is messy. Go for progress, not perfection. Christina did her job and edited this out, but anyway, I give credit to Laura Nelder because I think this is her line, but somebody else might have invented it. But she reminded me quite often of that Mike, we're not going for perfection, it's just progress. And really that's what planning is about. We talked a lot about as an organization, we're not necessarily looking for the shiniest plan at the end of the day. We want to make sure that we're running together as a team and we're pointed in the same direction. The scope of this thing is massive, so it's not going to be perfect. But it's about the process. It's about us engaging and collaborating with the team. So expect planning to be messy, but don't give up on it because you are realizing results that you maybe don't see. Kay and I probably have too much time to plan this. That's why we might be a little sloppy. The games are easy because we have no time to talk.
Yeah, let's go with that. So, key considerations for other events. Did I do this? No.
Is it mine? I'll do it. Yeah, so formal agreements can be set early to set baseline expectations. So from our venue perspective, and certainly how we work with a lot of groups that we needed formal agreements, get those done so that you have the goalposts on how you're going to operate together. Not that this was a massive issue for us, but certainly I think in a lot of cases if agreements were moved forward faster and completed, they may have set the tone for groups that were really reliant on the standard that's so set. You can just say, just do everything earlier, that's a way to be successful. That's easier said than done, right? So, and then be thoughtful and deliberate on the structure of your stakeholder involvement. So, I've got a slide here and I can't go back, I should have done that, but anyhow, Kay, I'll maybe let you.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So, no matter what the event, you need to define who needs to be at the table, when, throughout the whole planning process. It needs to be clearly communicated to others. And in this particular chart, we're showing the venue team structure and how there are different representatives for each of these functional areas, which we've talked about earlier. We brought on the lead team first in most cases. Sometimes we didn't have one of those reps available. So venue operations, sport, and the fit out or overlay, sometimes you call that getting your event space ready. And so that was a lead team of people who needed to meet more often and sooner in the process than others. Then we brought on a core team of additional functional areas, so medical, transportation, volunteer services, a whole variety that needed to be brought on and into the planning process next. Finally, there was an extended team, and on each venue, there weren't necessarily all of these functions represented, but in the larger facilities, such as Gary W. Harris, they were. And so the key here is to make sure that you have significant tasks for each of these functions to be performed when you bring them on board, rather than having them sit and wait and become bored and uncommitted.
I'm not going to cover this, but this is just a visual example of how we communicated our timelines with our stakeholders. And Scott professed this a lot, they're on right information, right time. And that's certainly salient, but you have to extend that and really making sure that when can I expect information. So many stakeholders thought that the game should come in, they're given a massive binder and you know exactly the steps you're going through. So not the case, and then most events are like that. A lot of time is spent around defining scope. So this is when we really hit our stride as a planning group and really defining, saying this is what the rest of our period looks like and when you can expect certain pieces of information to be done. So it allowed me to give some evidence to say, trust the process, everyone, and go through the process. Don't skip ahead saying, well, just tell me exactly what I'm doing because I need to know that. Well, no, you have to become a part of the team and we need to evolve as a group. So this was key for us to make sure we communicated that and were able to visually represent it.
And so for me, this was critical. Leading the group of people who are the venue leads out at each site to be able to see, first of all, the big picture at a glance over a year, which this allowed. So if you look at the top line, foundational learning, operational planning, and it moved into training and review. These were critical pieces of the planning puzzle for those venue teams. And then to be able to see in more detail each month's meeting, where we were going to land and who needed to be involved as part of those task groups that were guiding the process out at each site. It was easy to see if you're a big picture thinker and need that sort of big picture all the time, which I am, but also those individuals who wanted to see the details. And is this the night that I'm on, or this the month that I'm on, and presenting something? It provided that for them as well.
Okay, so our last slide here, these two bullets are actually 1 point, but you've all heard the statement, keep the end in mind as you're going through your planning, and that's certainly the case. But one of the themes that I think was a strength for us was having transfer of knowledge as a theme that drove our plans. So really that was a strategic communication piece that we used early on that say, we're going to do this with the future in mind. We're going to do this to say to the next host society, this is what we did and this is what you should know about it. So when you have the future in mind and you're building your plans as if somebody else is going to pick those up, they're just that much better. That was hard though. People struggled with that because a lot of times they're like, who cares? My job is now, and we get that. But really leveraging to just say, you know what, it's a good end result to show tomorrow what you did today, and then they'll just make your plans that much better now because they're just more communicatable and clearer. And you're thinking critically of what that looks like. So that was a good theme for us to use. Risk management, so certainly was a corporate and board function that we ran, but I think one of our success pieces that certainly could have done better, but we were getting there, was to use risk management as a tool at the lower levels and really using it as a theme of our planning. Aaron Bruce from the Canada Games Council kind of used the line, and this really worked for me, is that risk management helps you see what you don't see. If you think about what can go wrong, then you start to evaluate your plan. Again, I didn't care how good people's risk registers were. If they were thinking of how risky is what I'm doing in what you're planning, and I think you're just that much better at your plans because you've tested them and you're looking for maybe the holes that are there. So.
One item that I felt was really important to share was forward planning versus frequent meetings. We did have monthly meetings and they did become a little monotonous. We did in our evaluations from the senior volunteer leaders here that they would have preferred some longer sessions. So, for example, to talk about different functions and what they present in terms of leadership at games time and the roles that they played, so that you could see all of them in one planning session, rather than coming in drips and drabs to talk about what their functions were and the roles that they played over maybe a 3 or 4 month period. My last point here is using the live test as practical experience. One of the things that I don't think we did as well as we could have was take advantage of the test events and the tournaments that came up through the 2 years of planning that we were doing. I feel that it would have been preferable had we looked at the volunteer opportunities at those events and strategically planned for training those individuals to be able to take on roles so they could have an actual experience, because many had not been involved in sporting events before. And so I think that if it did happen with some of our volunteers, it was because they made the initiative, took the initiative rather, and facilitated their own training versus we as a planning group helping to do that.
Another way we use that as a leadership team is that I think it was a month out, that we actually created a live test for the games and had a day in the life of the games existing. And we set up all the venues in the room. We had the Western Park area pretty reserved, and we really ran a scenario that would really screw up the games and had people experience that, giving them all the tools they have at the games, computers, phones, all those fun things, and playing it out as if it was live to give them a sense of how complex what we were dealing with would be. Could spend a day on talking to you how that was organized and it went, but it was a neat way to really give people a sense of what was coming. It scared them because we were really sloppy and messy and thought, oh, we're never going to get this done. But we still had time, and we used that then as a theme going forward, saying, think about that experience and multiply by what we have to do. So that was a good way to give people a sense of what we were going to experience. This is sort of the counter to planning, but it's still important, is you certainly need good plans, but we really pushed the priority of making sure that their teams were ready versus just having the best possible plan. Because if you didn't have an aligned team that was on the same page, understood each other, had good relationships, people knew their roles, that binder is going to be irrelevant on the shelf when everybody's hitting the fan, right? So we really tried to push that theme on saying, guys, make sure we're ready as a group of people. How are we going to react when things go wrong? Because they will. So we're really focused on preparing for that and making sure our minds are in the right place. This one's maybe more a bit of therapy for the planning group and all the operational team, but the League of Good Ideas, or sorry, the Board of Directors, but you really want to manage scope, as that was a joke. Can we chop out where they laugh? Anyway, managing scope directly related to the complexity of planning, and that's really where timelines became huge for us to communicate to the team that had to execute on it, and the board in terms of saying, hey, what more can we do? This is really cool. This is a great idea. How else can we innovate? So you need to be really deliberate as a planning group on balancing both sides. Scope will change right close to the event. We all know that. But at the same time, make sure you lead your planning teams through the process of accepting new ideas and embracing those, and using that chance to bend yourself so that you know how adaptable you can be at games time. So anyhow, I think that's what I had, and we'll open up for questions. Hey, oh, Lynn Radford, yeah. Uh-oh.
I just want to ask Mike and Kay, and you might understand it. How important was it that both, in our case, the province of Alberta and the city of Red Deer, put their contribution through and allowed you to plan? So you knew that the dollars were there, they were in the bank account. How important was that?
Massive. Oh yes, we've got to repeat the question. So I think the question was, is how important was it for the Government of Canada, Province of Alberta, and the City of Red Deer to have their funding and that in place prior to really the games being executed. So we were fortunate in a lot of cases. The province basically gave their funding right up front, so that allowed us to earn a lot of interest revenue, which is massive for a host society. But I think the better notion from a planning perspective is we weren't spending tons of our time providing accountability reports and red tape to make sure that we were doing things. They were involved with us. They were on the board. They were with our committees. We made sure we communicated a lot with what was happening. And that really just created a better relationship one-on-one versus on paper. And so we weren't, as I say, spending our time doing those things to really show what we've done. They've already knew what we did, and that combined with certainly the financial side of it became super important. So when I was meeting with Sarah Jesse from the city, we were focusing on what we could be doing and what we were doing versus where is this report and how do you finish this, because they already knew that and they just trusted it because they're just such good people. But, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's an important piece for everyone to know that when you're going through this, you're going to host an event that you can push your government funding partners to contribute as early as possible, so that you're not worrying about cash flow as you're trying to operate these, because a lot of times some of your expenditures are way ahead of when you receive the cash.
Yeah, and I think that ties back to my earlier point on just, I think they felt, not to put words in their mouth, but they felt comfortable in doing that because they were involved with us. They were a part of our plan. They were a part of our team. So they knew that what was happening and where we were going because they had a say in that. It wasn't a formal governmental relationship. It was a true relationship about the success of this event, and that's why they're ready to give up all the cash. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, thank you.